We're live now. Okay. Good afternoon. This is the Senate Government Operations Committee. It is Wednesday the 15th. We are going to hear a little bit of testimony from people from Rights and Democracy. I first am going to start off by saying we have a bill on our wall, S57, which is about municipal authority over the discharge of firearms. And I know that all of us are getting a lot of emails about it. And so I just want to say to anyone who might be listening or want to know about the status of the bill, because I know there are a lot of people who are eager to let us know what they think and are concerned about this bill. We will be taking this bill up later in the session, and I will be sure to have people in who have varying opinions from all over the state, and we will hear your concerns, and we will make sure that we are listening to you. So I just wanted to let you know that, because I have not had a chance to reply to all the emails. I'm sure that my colleagues haven't had a chance to reply to all the emails. So we will be taking it up later this session, but not this week or next week. We still have other bills that are going to come before it. So I appreciate you reaching out and ask for your patience as we work through other bills on our agenda. So, and right now we have Tom Proctor from Rights and Democracy, who's going to introduce a few people who are going to speak with us about a different bill that we will potentially get later this session.
So thank you, Chair Hardy, and other members of the Senate Committee for Government Operations for welcoming us all today. My name is Tom Proctor, and I'm the Housing Justice Organiser for Rights and Democracy in Vermont. For those that don't know, RAD is a citizen organisation for Rights and Democracy Institute, founded in 2015. A theory of change that it takes people power year after year to make kind of big, bold, long-term changes we want to see in this country. I think what RAD does mostly is we lift up the voices from ordinary people across Vermont and New Hampshire. So often in these halls of power, it's lobbyists, it's private interests, it's landowners, and it's generational wealth that get to speak to your committees. And I think a large part of that is because these committees are held during the day, and a lot of people who are struggling day after day in Vermont cannot afford the time to come here and speak to you personally. And often their voices aren't heard, and their lived experiences aren't lifted up when we're accounting for a large percentage of people within Vermont. I'll be very brief when it comes to the RAD 2023 policy platform, and really try and stick with just things that you'll be hearing about in Senate GovOps this year. For a start, we will looking forward to seeing Just Cause Eviction as a charter change going back through House Government Operations and back to Senate GovOps. I'm very fond of this room. I saw Alison Clarkson here a lot last year, and I'm sure I'll see her again a lot this year. In the interim time between last year's vote and this year's vote, we've got Just Cause Eviction on 4 other municipalities: Brattleboro, Winooski, Essex Junction, and the town of Essex. Some of those activists have been working on their charter change votes are with me today to talk about their lived experience. I think it's also important to note that we are also pushing to get a statewide Just Cause Eviction bill passed. On top of that, we also want to talk a little bit about the fact that we don't currently track any housing data across Vermont. A rental registry has gone before both Senate and House a few times in the past, and we now believe it is time to reinvigorate those efforts and start data collecting on housing issues in earnest by popping that kind of language in the Housing Omnibus Bill. And I do hope that you folks will be debating that later on this year as well. I'm going to basically, final thing is, yes, ranked choice voting is obviously incredibly important. It's something that we have passed in Burlington, again, on a charter change. And we believe at Rights and Democracy that we should be having ranked choice voting for the presidential primaries and for all elections. Ranked choice voting gives more access to more candidates and can vote as a real choice at the ballot box. I am going to leave that speech there for now, because I realise that you guys are very pressed in terms of time. And I'm going to introduce the first of our 3 speakers today. With me is Anne Zimmerman. She's going to be speaking about the Brattleboro Just Cause Eviction campaign. On Zoom is Coralie Katrina, who is a very prominent activist in Winooski and works very closely with the New American community there and was instrumental in making sure that over 20 families were not evicted from 300 Main last year and would like to give an update on that. And finally, Angela Lawrence, who lives just outside of Brattleboro. And frankly, I spoke to Angela 2 weeks ago at her house that was rat infested, that had not had running water for 6 months, and whose electricity bills are $1,000 a month because she did not have properly heated apartment because her landlord refused to do any necessary changes. She now lives in a motel with her 2 kids and her husband, who recently got injured on a workplace where he works as a joiner on multi-million-dollar houses. I think it's really important you listen to these folks speak today. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of bravery to sit in this chair and testify to you folks. And although I acknowledge that some of these bills are not before you yet, I think it's very important to hear their stories before they are. And with that, I hand it over to Anne.
Hi, thanks for being on with us, even though this isn't on the plate right now, because it will be later in the session. My name is Anne Zimmerman. I live in Guilford, which is the Brattleboro area. For some context, I am a renter and someone who raised my kids in the Southern Vermont rental market as a low-income single parent. And housing was, during the time that I was raising my kids, the single biggest stressor in my life. And to some extent, you know, still continues to be, even though my kids are not independent anymore in their own. And I'm pretty sure that most people here are probably aware that we are in a housing crisis, particularly in the rental market. So I don't feel like I need to drive that particular point home, but I wanted to speak about why we need to end no-cause evictions and make just cause eviction into the law of the land. And at the very least, this body needs to approve the local charter changes that are passed by the voters. I wanted to put a human face on the crisis of no-cause eviction, which has gone way up in recent years. I speak to a situation of my friend Damaris and a group of her fellow tenants who reside or recently resided at an apartment complex in West Brattleboro known as Westbrook Court. And you may have read about it. There's been some recent coverage, but I don't think it's unique by any means. Damaris and her fellow tenants, who I've gotten to know recently, created a community of neighbors who gardened and barbecued together and generally looked out for each other, especially since a number of them live with a disability or aging or have other life challenges. They had created a really nice situation and felt as though they were good tenants who paid their rent and didn't cause any trouble. And last October, at least a dozen of them, possibly as many as 20 residents of Westbrook Court received notices that their leases would not be renewed and no cause was given. And they had 60 or 90 days, depending on how long they had lived there, to move out in the middle of winter, no less. To the majority of those who got the notice of lease non-renewal were handicapped in some way or elderly or low income. And a common thread seems to be that most, if not all of them, were on housing assistance of some kind. The complex had recently been sold to a private equity corporation, and it seems that the new owners didn't want to deal with any of that. There were others in the complex who were offered a new lease, but saw their rent go up exorbitantly and, you know, had to cough up more in a security deposit. And of course, immediate distress set in because of the incredible difficulty of finding housing right now in the Brattleboro area, particularly anything affordable. So just for example, Damaris's neighbor Matt needs to be in a handicapped accessible unit. That's not that easy to find on a first floor. He's facing major surgery that will put him in a wheelchair. It's been postponed a lot due to COVID, and so he can barely walk right now, let alone, you know, pick up and move. Another tenant is a single mother who couldn't find anything local, who took an apartment in Keene, New Hampshire, and her daughter is couch surfing so she could finish out the school year. I don't actually have a hard time imagining that situation playing out around town and in other households too. I imagine that is not all that uncommon. So the no-cause evictions broke up a community of neighbors, and in this case also separated a family. Damaris, my friend, who's in her 70s and has Parkinson's, she also needs a first floor unit. She was forced to stop working during the pandemic due to her added vulnerability. And what she wanted me to make sure that you knew is how much trauma comes from finding out you have that much time to move while trying to survive on a low income in this housing market. Much nowhere to go. So I know that you guys don't govern by anecdote, and there's so many stories where I live, but it's important to me that these people are real to you. I have a friend who has been in limbo for many months. She was told her building was being sold and she needed to move, only then to have that vacated apartment be rented to someone else for a much higher rent. And I remember when selling a rental building that was fully rented, that was an asset. Now people are told they have to get out just so the rent can be jacked up by the new owners, or even by the same owner who, by the way, didn't actually sell it. And I'll just add that I realize that all of these folks are victims of a housing crisis that is driven by a number of different forces, some of which need more sweeping solutions, and no one who is advocating for just cause eviction thinks this is any kind of a panacea for all of our housing troubles, but it is something that can be done to alleviate some of the considerable stress of folks who are otherwise in a pretty precarious housing situation, which renting is almost by default, and give more stability to families and communities. I have certainly felt that acute stress while raising my kids of worrying about not being able to find a place to live. And if you have never experienced that particular terror as a parent, I will assure you that there isn't anything quite like it. So to me, the crux of the issue is one of those vacated apartments in Westbrook had been rented for $1,050. And I just recently saw it advertised for $1,700. It is a very modest, not large place at all. That is out of range of someone living on housing assistance. You can see why the corporate owner would want to remove those people. Most people I know could actually not afford that. It's out of step with the reality of local wages in the Brattleboro area. Although it is perhaps a little more normal for people moving into our area from other markets. And these apartments are in need of repairs. They don't seem to be happening, those repairs. And it would appear that the goal is to make a lot of money very quickly, not to invest in long-term quality housing. So just cause eviction would protect renters who pay their rent and have done nothing wrong from having to be in a state of constant worry over losing housing. We will all be better for it. Communities will be stronger for it. And just lastly, I want to say that I have listened to argument after argument of some of the sort of smaller local landlords who don't necessarily fit that new corporate landlord profile, who complain that this is the only way that they can remove problem tenants. They insist they only ever want to get rid of the bad ones, and we should not have to renew a lease to destructive or dirty tenants, or maybe even ones that other tenants are complaining about. I don't really have time to speak to everything that's wrong with that assumption, but I would submit that there is a system of checks and balances in place whereby those who are committing violations of health and safety, excessive noise, illegal activity, non-payment of rent, or other lease violations can be removed. And properties where the landlords are on site are exempt from this. When there is an inherent balance in the power relationship, as there is between landlords and tenants, which is really the haves and the have-nots, if you will. And it involves something as basic as having a roof over your head. We absolutely need to keep the system of checks and balances rather than maintain this shortcut that is no cause eviction. So I'm asking you, when this comes before you later, if you believe that housing is a human right, and I hope we can agree that housing is a human right, to legislate in support of just cause eviction. And thank you for giving us the time that you weren't necessarily planning on.
Thank you very much. Ms. Lawrence? Okay. What center? Clarkson.
Anne, would you just make sure you email that, your testimony to Olivia? That would be great. Thanks.
Ms. Lawrence, can you hear us?
Oh, you're muted.
We can't hear you. We see you, but we can't hear you. Unfortunately, we can't hear you. Yeah, you're not, it doesn't look like you're muted, but we can't, oh, we just heard a little bit.
Can you all hear me now?
Yes, excellent. Excellent.
Sorry about that. Hi, good afternoon, Chair Hardy. Good afternoon, Vice Chair Tanya and all the committee members. My name is Angela Lawrence. I am currently homeless. I am a mom of two boys. I, I, some of you might know me as making history as being also an elected official, just like you guys, as being the first Black woman high bailiff in the state of Vermont. I do wear many, many hats here in Windham County. I just came here to tell you guys my story, my current story right now. As you all know, we are struggling. I am homeless. We're living off the car with my two boys, my 7-year-old and my 3-year-old. And like Tom said, my injured spouse. My spouse is a carpenter. He got injured about 2, 3 weeks ago. Fell and broke a rib and had a laceration on his liver and a punctured lung. So he was the only income. We were a one income family. I was a stay-at-home mom because Vermont doesn't let us put kids in daycare until or preschool until age 4. My child is 3, so with the income that we have, it's much cheaper to have one parent stay at home and the other parent work, unfortunately. So I have been going through the system, through either economic services, whatever system. Takes me about 3 hours to get to somebody with the hopes of having a stable place for my family and I. But come to find out 3 hours later, there's no place to stay. This is very unfortunately, me being an elected official, I need a stable place for me in order to perform my duties, appropriately. Um, this, I'm sorry, excuse my, but the system is fucked up. I'm really sorry about my language. It's really messed up. I've been calling for 14 days straight for this system, and there's no place for us. A family that's sleeping in the car in the cold. This is really unfortunate.
I'm sorry.
The closest place to economic services is about almost an hour and a half. I have a child in the school district. There's no way I could be traveling almost 2 hours to just drop off my child to school. I am trying to stay close just because my child can get the education that he deserves. This is not just hard for regular people. Even elected officials are struggling. We're struggling to find a 3-bedroom apartment. There's no 3-bedroom apartment. There's no apartment for families. There's either a 1-bedroom or second bedroom. You can't put 4 to 5 people in a bedroom like that, in a apartment like that. I mean, 14 days, it's a long time to try and find a place. You're sleeping in your car with 2 kids. It's a long time to try and get assistance. The benchmark of charging people for rent is at least a third of anybody's income. That's very unrealistic, because once you add up a lot of the bills, there's nothing left for saving or improving that quality of life, like home ownership. My dream and my goal coming to Vermont 10 years ago was to have that dream of having that white picket fence that everybody talks about. I immigrated to this country 21 years ago from Kenya. That was my dream, to have a white picket fence, but you can't do that. It's impossible to do that. especially being a BIPOC person. It's very hard to do that. I want to keep my family in Vermont. In Kenya, I grew up with similar traits that Vermont has around a farm, milking cows, chasing the chickens. I want my kids to be able to chase the chickens around like I did when I was little. But we can't do that. Vermont families are having their lives squeezed out of them by greedy out of state real estate investors that have no interest in the well-being of Vermont families or Vermont communities. This is a affects Vermonters of people of color especially. I testified the same issue 2 years ago, and yet I'm coming back 2 years later. 2 years before I was housed. 2 years later, I am homeless. Nothing has changed. We elect the officials because they promise us they're gonna change. They're gonna do what they're telling us they're gonna do during their campaign. The Democrats have now the majority. We need change. We need housing. How do you tell your kids that you failed them? How do you explain that to them? You don't put them to bed. You don't see them waking up in the morning because somebody else has volunteered to house them.
Ms. Lawrence, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And I'm so sorry at the difficult time, clearly, that you and your family have been through. It's unacceptable. And I'm sorry that you and your children don't have a safe, good place to live. Do you have access to any of the emergency housing vouchers?
I just, after almost 8 days, we finally just got a caseworker. After 8 days searching for a caseworker, and we finally got one, and I'm supposed to meet with her at 3 o'clock today, and hopefully she can help. But that's what I've been doing every day, twice a day, on the phone, 3 hours, going through emergency housing phone calls for 14 days straight now, and nothing.
Well, I hope that the meeting this afternoon is productive and that you're able to find a place to live. And thank you for sharing your story with us today. And I wish you all the best, to you and your family. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angela.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So our next witnesses are here, and
I was going to say, it seems like Coralie is not on the call, so thank you all for your time today. I appreciate this is not the bill that you're currently looking at, but as I said,
It's okay, we'll be looking at it too.
thank you. Yeah, I appreciate you listening today.
okay, so we are going to move on to S39. And we have our joint fiscal office, chief fiscal officer, and fiscal analyst. Are you guys gonna? Yeah.
We'll do that, yeah. I think Dana's gonna be the point person on this, but.
Okay. So what we were hoping is you know that we're looking at S39, and I talked to you about just sort of giving us kind of a rough overview of the financial implications so that it can help us sort of decide what we want to keep in the bill, what we might want to add to the bill, or what guide our decision making. So maybe you don't know us all, so we'll introduce ourselves to you, and then we'll let you guys take it away. So I'm Ruth Hardy.
I'm Jane Parker, committee assistant. Connie Dinoski. Rebecca White, Windsor County District.
Bob Norris, Franklin County.
And Watson, Washington District.
Allison Clarkson, Windsor County District. It's great to see you both. All three of you. Fabulous. Here's our hot team here from JFO and.
And Ledge Council, yeah.
Thank you.
So why don't we introduce ourselves? I'm Catherine Dunn. I'm the Chief Fiscal Officer and
And I'm Dan Dickerson, I'm a fiscal analyst.
and Dan says that, but he also does the legislative budget for all the offices as well. And we provide the fiscal, just like the Ledge Council provides legal services for us, we provide fiscal services for all the offices. So that he has a particular expertise in understanding the legislative budget and yeah, things you're considering.
Yes, I wear two hats. So not only will I be providing some sort of analysis of this bill, but if you pass it and it requires additional funding, then I'll be putting that funding into action when I create next year's budget. So I typed some notes today. They're very rough estimates at this point based on what's in the bill and you know, what the going rates are for health plans. And then as you continue to hone in on what you would like to do, you know, I can certainly come back with a more formal analysis that you can put up on your screen and print copies of. But I guess before I go into the provisions of the bill, I did want to give just some context as far as you know, the legislature, the legislative branch is completely general funded. And so I just wanted to give you a sense of, you know, in the grand scheme of the general fund, where the legislature falls. And so the governor's FY24 budget request proposes 2.3 billion in general fund monies going out the door. And of that, the legislative branch as a whole is 20.4 million. So we're less than 1% of the total general fund budget, and that's not even giving you the entire state budget. So it's a very small piece, but you know, you all play a very important role in how government functions in Vermont. So of that legislative branch budget, there are multiple appropriations that fall into that. The legislature itself is a $10.5 million appropriation, or at least it will be in FY24 if the budget passes as was proposed. So you're about half of the legislature itself is about half of the total legislative branch budget. And that's not just legislators. There are a few offices that fall under that appropriation.
Does the Ledge Council fall under that?
Ledge Council is a separate appropriation unit, but Mike Ferrant's folks are within that. Arlene Donovan and her HR office are within that. And then the House Clerk, Senate Secretary, and their staff fall under that. So there are a decent number of staff. I would say that, you know, of that 10.5 million, the legislators themselves, and that's the salaries and then the expenses that are paid out, are probably, you know, a little bit less than half, maybe close to 4.5–5 million. So, you know, it's a very important function. It's a very small piece of the general fund pie, but you know, it means that you know, depending on what you do here, it does, you know, impact the legislative budget. But I think in the grand scheme of the general fund, it's pretty small, but it is significant for you all. So I wanted to provide that context just to give you a sense of the scope.
That's good perspective.
So the first piece of the bill that I'll touch on is the health insurance piece. And I know you've heard a walkthrough, but basically the bill proposes to extend access to the state health insurance plan to members of the General Assembly starting January 1, 2024. And this would be about halfway through the upcoming fiscal year 24. So as far as budgeting, you know, as I go to make a budget for, or as I guess if I go to amend a budget for 24 in order to accommodate this, it would be about a half year. And then the first full year of that cost would be in FY25. So I just wanted to walk you through some of my very preliminary assumptions. I know the bill as drafted proposes 100% funding, but I've assumed 80% is provided by the state, and then the employee would provide the extra 20%. And I know there there are several plans that are available. My assumption has been that members would buy into the Select Care point of service plans. There are 3 tiers. There are other, I think there's a total choice plan, and there are a few staff people within the General Assembly that buy into that, but by and large, most employees just use that Select Care. So I just assume that, just to keep things simple, at least for right now. And so the tiers I pulled off of that document that Commissioner Fastigi provided that is pertaining to the current calendar year. So, that means that in calendar year 2024, it'll probably be a little bit more cost-wise, but that's something that's concrete that you can look at and see. And so, the first tier is the employee only, so it's a single plan. It's a little under 10,000 as a state share, and then the employee is on the hook for about 2,500. Employee plus one is about 20,000 on the state side, and then about 5,000 on the employee side. And then the family plan is 27,000 for the employer, and then about 7,000 for the employee. And this is where I've sort of made a wild guess, but I'm assuming right now at least that about 50% of members buy into one of these plans. And so as far as coming up with a preliminary cost, I sort of just said, okay, there's a minimum cost, and then, sorry, there's a question.
No, it's okay. Senator Bielski, let's wait for him to go through this section, and then we'll take questions on the health insurance part. Go ahead, Dan.
So I've assumed, a minimum cost would be all of that 50% of 50% cohort just buying the single plan, which I know won't be the case, but at least to see what based on this 50% assumption, what that number would be. And then the maximum would be everybody buying into one of those family plans. And so for a full year, based on 2023 premiums, it's about a $900,000 annual cost if everybody is buying into that first year, the single plan. And then it could be up to 2.5 million if everybody bought into the family plan. So probably somewhere in the middle on a full year basis.
You mean by everyone, you mean 50%?
Oh yeah, all of that 50%. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So 90 members, all of them, based on my current assumptions, all of them either buying that cheapest plan or that most expensive plan. So it's anywhere from 900,000 to 2.5 million, and that's a full year. So that first, if we apply that to the remainder of FY24, which starts January 1st next year, you take about half that for that first half year.
Okay. Senator Bielski, did you have a question about this?
Yeah, my question, so I understand that you said it's a wild guess to get to that 50%, but is there a more scientific way to get a sense of who might buy in, or because it won't be 100%, but.
We could survey all of the current members and just say, hey, if this was available to you, would you take it, and what tier would you buy into? I think that would be the best way of doing it. Although, membership changes and people's family situations change. I mean, lots of things change throughout the year, so that's not necessarily going to be concrete, but that would be the best way to get at it. And if people were willing to provide that information, then it would be extremely helpful. But otherwise, the legislators are so much different from a typical state employee because people have other jobs or they have spouses with other jobs.
Or they're on
they bring in
Yes.
there are a wide range of family situations. So it's really, without having, concrete survey data, it's hard to make a really accurate prediction.
Mm-hmm. Senator White.
Thank you, Chair Hardy. So do you have any sense of that number in relation to the number of people who are over 65 who serve currently and just would qualify traditionally for other?
I don't have any demographic data for the General Assembly.
And one consideration, and Catherine and I talked about this, is that some people over 65 who qualify for Medicare might accept the health insurance as a supplementary plan.
If there was a
And I don't
supplemental.
know, Jen can talk about that maybe about whether or not that's an option, but
It have to be, I think it would have to be a supplemental plan, not
not the state
Not the
health
full.
insurance plan, okay, so that, maybe that's not an option then.
It might just be a different option, it may be.
Or a different option.
You would want to make available to people in Medicare.
Okay, Senator Norris.
Yes, so thank you. So you're saying, Dan, this plan, the numbers that you're presenting to us is we worked, well, roughly 4 months out of the year. And then many of us still work throughout the course of the year, going to different functions or whatever else. Is it the proposal in this bill and what you're looking at is that the state would pay for the entire 12 months their share?
That is, I should have clarified that at the beginning, but that is my assumption is yes, you would receive a full year of coverage if you opted into one of those plans.
Oh, okay.
So it does create the tricky situation. I know this came, I listened to some of the prior testimony, but as far as, you know, during the off session, if you're not receiving compensation, but you're incurring costs for health premiums, how would that work out? And I think Mike said he might have to just contact people and say, hey, send me a check, but that's obviously not easy for him. So that it does create that complication, but that's sort of an operational piece that I would defer to Mike and the DHR folks on. But as far as, you know, if we're providing this as an option for an entire year, I'm giving you a sense of what the cost could be based on the assumption at this point that it's 50% of members buying it.
So just roughly what, say 4 months or so, for 8 months out of the year, what would the employer's share be approximately for 8 months?
I think for the cheapest, let's see, I guess if I took 2/3 of that 900,000, that's 600,000 for the off session. And then, there's roughly 2/3 of the highest costs would be 1.7 million-ish.
Wow. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think the contemplation is that we wouldn't want to just provide it for part of the year because people going on and off doesn't really make any sense.
Well, that wouldn't be attractive to any insurance company either. I mean, that would be a subgroup that it would make no sense. And even if we didn't raise our pay, that would be an added compensation piece that many people would be attracted to.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
help us pay for all our non-session work.
Are there other questions about the health insurance? Okay, Senator White, go ahead.
Does that include dental and vision in your numbers?
My understanding is that you can, as it stands, you
We
can
can
buy
get
into the
that.
insurance. You just have to pay the premium yourself, whereas other state employees, that's provided. But I did not contemplate that, and I'm not sure if that's built
I
into.
think we have it separately.
Dental, right, you do.
It's not-
Jennifer Garvey, legislative council.
Yeah.
The, Dan's right, you can currently purchase the dental plan at full cost. The state does not have a separate vision plan that I'm aware of, although there is a very small vision benefit in the state employee health insurance plan.
Very small.
Yes, very small. But yes,
It pays for the
But that would be
screws in the
separate.
glasses.
$1,000 a calendar year.
A screw.
A screw in the glass.
I think it's $100 every 2 years,
Yes,
something like that.
That sounds right.
Or
I exam.
my exam, yes, but
Yeah.
I talked dentures, I'm sorry.
Oh, dental,
Dental work, I'm at
dental work, yes, dental work.
$1,000 in a calendar year.
So dental, we already can buy, but it is
Buy in at full cost, yeah.
the cost. And the bill doesn't do anything with that. We can certainly consider adding that, but it's not in there at the moment.
So
Okay, go ahead.
I just
Senator.
want to real quick, are we going to get a breakdown of, say, we'll use me as an example, Bob Norris, okay, single and family, as to the cost per year for so I can see that.
Dan did provide that at the beginning of his testimony, but I think that maybe,
Beth, didn't you get it also from, did Beth Fisky?
Yeah.
I printed that out, actually.
yeah, it should be on our website from the
It is.
commissioner.
It is on.
So you
And a
can-
Oh, yeah, I've seen it.
supplemental Medicare plan would be less than these full comprehensive plans, yes?
probably,
Yes.
probably. So
It is, it's
we'll,
substantially less.
I expect so.
Okay.
Senator Clarkson, can you?
Sorry.
Thank you.
That was a supplemental comment.
Yeah, I just.
Sorry.
We want the witnesses to answer the questions. we can get, once we know what we're doing, we'll have JFO write up an official fiscal note, and they'll have this information included in it, I would assume. Yeah, yeah. And we could consider doing a survey. It might be useful if it's useful for you. I don't know how many legislators would actually
It would definitely,
answer it, but we could give it a try. And if you or Mike or Jen, if any of you have suggestions for the sort of the platform that we could use for creating some kind of survey, we could send it out on behalf of the Senate Government Operations Committee.
We could talk to IT if that's something. you want.
Okay, yeah, if that would be helpful, if we could just look into how we might do that, and we could ask about more than just the health insurance. Assuming we have time to do all this, but if the 6 of us all, also talk to all of our colleagues, say, please do that survey, it might help. Please send Mike that check for $1.85. Okay, let's go on to the next part of the thing.
okay, so part 2, compensation, and there are 2 pieces to this. The first one is the relatively easy one, and that's extending or allowing for legislators to receive 1 day of pay each week during the off session. So currently your weekly pay is $811.68, and your daily pay is $163. So calculating that for 178 members, because I think the way I read this bill is it's only for the rank and file and not for the speaker pro tem, because they already get a salary throughout the year. So it's calculating that for 178 members for 34 weeks, because there's the 18-week session. It's about $1 million annually, based on that current salary figure. So that's assuming you would also receive pay for town meeting week, and that you would also receive. There's always that period at the end of session where, at least on the House side, a lot of members don't come in, they don't get paid. Until, unless the negotiators are here, you'd have negotiators and conference committees, and other members would stay home. So it gets dicey there. But I'm just assuming every week, other than that 18-week session, you're getting at least 1 day of pay each week, just to keep it simple.
What was the per day number again?
I'm sorry?
What was the per day number again?
163 per day. That's the 2023 rate.
Okay. And that, in the bill, the way it's drafted, wouldn't start until FY 25, I think, Jen? Not till the next biennium, basically.
Right, it would start in the middle of FY 25.
Yeah, it actually, I mean, it'd really be an FY 26, because January 1st is when the session starts. So you'd all be receiving your weekly pay. So it's, there might be a little bit in June, but I think more often than not, there's not a whole lot of activity in June, because everybody's like, get out of here.
Yeah.
So I think it would, in reality, be FY 26 when that would really begin to be a cost that's incurred.
Right. So yeah, we could even say July 1st of 20, whatever that. Yeah, just to make it clean. Okay, cool. Next.
So the second piece of this is also sort of a wild guess at this point, but just to restate what's in the bill. So this, for members that are on special committees or joint committees during the off session, when those members put in hours for prep time leading up to those meetings, they would be authorized to claim or fill out a timesheet and receive an hourly rate of 2.5% of the weekly pay. So based on what your weekly pay is in calendar year 2023, that hourly, for that 2.5% is $20.29 per hour. So my assumption at this point, and this is just about as scientific as my 50% test. But my assumption at this point is each member on a committee is going to put in 1 hour of prep per meeting. So there's some people that probably aren't going to put any time. There are probably some people that are going to have hours and hours of conversation with staff and with the advocate community. So it would really be a mixed bag. But I'm assuming an hour of prep per person per meeting. And then I looked back into the vision accounting system to see, okay, how many people are receiving per diem for meetings going back a few years. And that actually fluctuates up and down quite a bit. But it led me to the conclusion that, maybe for now, I provide sort of a low end estimate and a high end estimate. So the low end is 450 per diems during an off session. So that's not how many meetings there are, but that's how many people are receiving per diem for a meeting. So that's the low end, and then the high end is 900. And there have been a few years where I think it's even exceeded that. And so based on that, and based on my assumption of each person putting in an hour of prep, it's anywhere from a $10,000 to $20,000 cost. So not significant, or not terribly significant. So I think even if my 1 hour estimate is low, I can't imagine this being, it's hard for me to imagine this being more than, a $50,000 to $100,000 new cost. So it's certainly something, but it's not, compared to the other two provisions we walked through, it's pretty small. So a couple of notes that I did want to make on this, I think, and Mike might have spoken to this previously, but I see this as being somewhat administratively challenging because we're now requiring legislators to fill out a timesheet. And I think, at least for me, in an ideal world, not only would you be filling out a timesheet, but you would be allocating your time to, you'd have to code it to whatever committee it is, so that way we can track, how much of this is attributable to the judicial oversight or judicial nominating board, or how much of this is attributable to joint fiscal. I think for me, that's good accounting practice, but it's certainly, for Mike and for you all, it's a little complicated. So I just wanted to put that out there. I don't know if that rises to the level of Mike saying, and I'd let him speak to that, like he would need another person to help or potentially help with that. But it is something that, at least for me, catches my eye, is this could be some additional administrative cost. And he also mentioned maybe this is where we consider shifting legislators to a separate pay system, just that gives us more flexibility, which maybe that's a good option. Maybe it's a consideration for the study committee, but another thing that probably could be some new administrative costs. I don't have a guess for you what that might be, but just to flag that for you. And another option, because this one's a little more complicated, but also doesn't have an effective date of until January 1, 2025, is maybe this is something that you leave up to that study committee to sort of maybe sort out a little bit more, since it wouldn't be impacting the next fiscal year. It'd be a new biennium. So just an option there, or just something to consider.
Can I say one more thing about that? I'm just thinking about that. That's another one of those things, wouldn't it? Because it's summer study, so it wouldn't really impact you until after you're through the session.
Yeah, and this also has an effective date for the next biennium, the two salaries.
Right, so it's the same as what, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's all I have on the compensation. There are a few other provisions, but I just wanted to stop.
Okay, are there questions on any of that, Senator Clarkson?
Yeah, if you'd be kind enough to send your notes on this, just so that as we think about what we're choosing to do, it'd be helpful to actually have them.
They're gonna do an official fiscal note when.
I know, but that requires us to make our decisions first about what we want.
Right, and
So-
I asked them to give verbal testimony until we
Okay.
are sure what we're doing.
Okay, so I just listened, I didn't write all that down. So the problem with that is that as we weigh those options, I would love to see them. So maybe we'll just have to ask you to repeat that another.
And yeah, Senator Vihosky and I are taking notes, so, and we can always ask them to come back in, but we're gonna wait for any kind of written analysis until we figure out what we're doing.
Yeah, no, it's just options, so it's good.
So moving on into the childcare, actually, let me first touch on the piece where the meals and lodging, the current mechanism is altered. And let me just say that I see this as, you know, as far as allowing members to either continue to opt into the meal lodging allowance or allow for reimbursement. I see this as, if anything, maybe a minor savings, but really probably de minimis. I don't see any cost, any real savings from this. Just not much different than it is currently. On the childcare piece.
Senator
Oh, I'm
Wilson
sorry.
has a question here.
So, sorry, I just wanted to clarify. I'm not sure I understood, but you were just saying, what is it that's not, that's not,
There's a provision in the bill that would allow us to decide whether we're going to take
oh,
a
that's,
stipend
yes,
or
okay.
do the actual reimbursement for
Right,
costs.
and so that switch, or that allowance isn't, that's a negligible.
Yeah,
Yeah, if anything, it'll be a little bit of savings because maybe some cohort of the General Assembly might begin claiming their actual costs, which might be a little bit less than that, that rate that's set out by the General Services Administration. So it could be some savings, but I don't think it's going to be significant.
Great, thank you.
Senator Carson.
Did you do any analysis about the administrative difference? Because it strikes me as an administrative nightmare to have to do that for 180 members.
Well, I think that if you were just, currently state employees, if they're filing their reimbursement claim for individual meals, can state the actual amount of the meal, but they don't have, they can submit a receipt, but they don't have to. It's not required.
Right.
And I think the state plan for state employees is an accountable plan. So I think the same provision would extend to you all.
Yeah,
Certainly
that-
file the actual cost, but you don't need to submit the receipts, which I don't think
Right.
adds a whole lot of burden for Mike and his group, but he can.
Yeah, we had testimony from
Right.
Mike about
We heard
this,
from-
and
I was just
my
curious if you had
recollection.
looked at that as well.
I don't see this as being overly complex. I think that compensation piece is probably more complex than this would be. But if people did begin submitting receipts and if there were a large number of people that were asking legislative operations for assistance in doing expense reports, then maybe that could be, but I don't have the expertise in that area that Mike does, so I would defer to him. But I don't see it as being an additional burden.
Mike, do you want to just give us 2 sentences to recap what you testified to on this?
Mike Brunt, Office of Legislative Operations. If I don't need to force you to provide receipts, I will not. And it wouldn't be an enormous shift or change in our operation workload. If I do have to force you to provide receipts, that would be a significant increase.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
And because, I guess, just to say one more thing on that, because the limit is still whatever the federal rate is for Montpelier, I'm not concerned about people claiming something that's wildly over what it currently is. So that's helpful in doing analysis.
Right. Well, that's of course part of the challenge is the feds have a different amount than what we are being paid at the moment. I mean, so lunch, when we have our special, when we have a task force and we always, let's say you have a $12 lunch, you put in $12. Oh, you always have to do an override because the feds only allow 10. Right? I mean, that's the way it's been.
That's not the feds, that's state.
Oh, that's the state, okay.
It's the state maximum.
Even so. Right. So I would just remind everybody that state workers get paid a living wage at least. So the difference is they don't have to have a lunch or per diem amount because they're paid full-time all year long. And we're not, so
Not all of them are, but
most of them are.
you want to carry on, Dan?
Sure. So moving on to the childcare, and there are 2 provisions in this bill that that deal with childcare but are sort of different programs. So the first is there's the existing flex spending program for state employees that allow them to contribute up to $5,000 to a plan and then reimburse themselves tax-free as actual costs are incurred. I don't see this as being an additional cost to the state because it's something that you as an employee would pay into and then receive reimbursement during the year. So it's that I won't provide an analysis on because I don't think there's any cost. But the second piece, which would allow for members to receive reimbursement from state funds for costs up to $5,000. I've one more time made sort of a wild estimate that, hey, maybe 20% of the membership of the General Assembly would have, children or dependents that would require or would drive them to request reimbursement under this. And if they're all requesting the full 5,000 annually, then it's roughly $180,000 to $200,000, or it's $180,000 cost annually. And that's just based on an assumption of 20% or 36 members of the 180 member General Assembly requesting reimbursement.
How much was the total?
180,000.
180,000, okay. Okay, are there any questions about that? Somebody else speak?
I don't have a question directly about that 500,000, but I am wondering, so the other aspect of this bill that pertains to dependent care is the FSA, which I know is money coming from us, but do more people buying into that increase the cost of administering that? Does my question make sense?
I don't think so, but I think DHR would probably be better suited to answer that. I mean, I think they've got the infrastructure up and running. It's, when I opt into the childcare flex spending, it's a pretty simple process on my timesheet. So it would require you going into the VTHR system and having to opt into that. So it'd be a little bit of learning for members of the General Assembly that would probably fall to either legislative operations or potentially HR, but I don't think, as far as the infrastructure for implementing that, I don't think it would be a dramatic cost increase or any real cost increase.
What about the current, that's available for current employees at all?
Oh, yes, and I think you've heard about this from the Commissioner of HR, but there is a program currently for state employees. I think you have to be within a certain income threshold, but you can file a claim to get some reimbursement for childcare costs.
It was pretty modest, as I recall.
Yeah, I think the limit on the website is 1,600, but I think from what I heard in testimony, it's typically much less than that because there's just not a whole lot of money available there's not a big pool of money to provide that benefit to employees. So there is an existing program that's pretty modest. So this would be quite a bit more generous than that program. And, I don't want to pass judgment on like what's fair and not fair, but I don't know if VSEA or somebody else might, well, actually they've been in, I don't know if they said anything on this, but I would just flag that as something that might cause some consternation, but so I don't want to be that person.
Senator Mihosky?
I recognize that you may not know the answer to this, but do you by chance know what that income threshold is for being able to utilize that?
I was just on the DHR site and it was 75,000. But I don't know if that's an individual or if it's family, but I know the number and it was 75,000.
And that was to access the very modest existing program. Okay. Are there other questions for Dan or Catherine? Is there anything else that you think we should know as we're considering stuff?
The only other thing that I wanted to flag is there is a modest cost associated with the working group just because legislators coming in receiving pay. It's about, I estimated probably about 15,000, but as I build the legislative budget, I will say that we can absorb that and no additional funding is needed. So hopefully that makes you guys feel really good. I would not come in and request additional funding for that study group.
Okay. All right, Senator Clarkson.
So Dan, we're supposed to be 3 equal branches of government, right? Right. The question I have for you is, of the $8.3 billion budget, a mere 20 or 21.4, I can't remember if it's 20 or
20.4 billion.
Yeah, 24 million is the legislative branch. Can you just tell us what the administrative branch is and what the judicial branch is, Mark?
I don't have
If
those.
you get kind of to get those to us, that would be
Yes.
very helpful. I will just remind us that we're supposed to be 3 equal branches of government. Not only are we not paid comparably, we also don't meet or work comparably, which puts us at a distinct disadvantage. Just looking at equity on the whole picture.
Other questions? Okay, this was really helpful. Thank
Yeah,
you very
super
much to sort of look at the range. And if we're able to do that survey, Mike, is that something you can ask about, or do you want me to ask, or how should?
Why don't I have a conversation with Kevin Moore?
Okay,
Find out how survey results have gone in prior iterations, because I know they've sent surveys to all
Yeah.
legislators in the past. So I can find out what the return rate is.
Yeah.
Before going forward.
okay, return rate and then how it could work. And then I would want you guys, all 3 of you, to look at it before we send it out to make sure we're asking the questions that would be helpful to have answers to. If we're gonna bother to do a survey, I don't want it to just be one question. Senator Watson.
So I just want to make sure that my math is here correct. So just if we did all of these pieces together, I'm coming up with about 3.7 million. Right, the high end of the health insurance, so 2.5 million there. 1 for compensation, 20,000 roughly for special committees, childcare at 180.
Yes, if you were going off the high estimate for healthcare, then 3.7 million sounds
Okay.
right. But I think
But the low end is
it is only 900,000.
yeah.
I just also want to, we're talking all current, what's happening today, like these reimbursement rates are all in this year, right?
Yeah, based on all the current salaries, the current health insurance rates, so that I think,
Yeah.
when this goes into effect, it would be a little bit higher. But based on today's rates, yes, at the high end, it would be.
Okay,
Thank you.
Senator Mihoski.
In terms of the survey, I think it's a great idea, and given the sort of data we're asking people for, I wonder if it should come through legislative operations or HR rather than from like an individual committee or committee member. Like we're asking people about health insurance and.
Yeah, we can talk about that, and I can ask the pro tem and see if that might be helpful. And also, we just need to make sure, we need to get the bill out before crossover, and it has to go to approps, so we have timing considerations. Senator White.
Thank you, Chair Hardy. So just so I'm totally clear on the bill, my understanding is we're not really giving ourselves a raise. There's no, you're going to now be making more during the session. Like, we're not increasing our salary in any way. Rather, what we're doing is adding additional benefits like the healthcare in this bill and the additional out of session and summer committee and childcare benefit. I'm wondering if you have any resources on is there anything that JFO has on a actual raise, like us giving ourselves what would the benefit be if we truly were compensated at a living wage based on an assumed amount of hours that we traditionally do?
I'm gonna stop you before you answer, because I don't think that's a question that's fair for them to answer right now in terms of, because that's a policy decision really. And that is actually a question that the off-session committee will be looking at, like, what about, the overall compensation of the legislature. So, yeah, I just don't want to put you in an awkward position about opining on how much legislators should be paid, but.
I don't know if you've had NCSL in here, but I imagine they've done some research. and some
we have.
literature on what various general assemblies, what the compensation structure is for general assembly. So if you don't have that already, I can certainly look it up and provide it.
I think it's on our website already. We had them in when we first did the bill. Yeah. Sorry, Senator Way, I just.
That's okay. I didn't know if they'd done anything on it in the past.
Yeah.
And that's what the working group would be
So,
addressing.
you haven't done-
We have obviously worked, before, you're now tied to the COLA, the.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So before that, the legislature did vote through raises, but it was not, you're asking a very different question for about a livable wage. So yes, we can go back and look at what
No,
boards
don't worry
have done
about
in the
it.
past, but I would say to you also, I think you're technically right about salary and the benefits, but people generally, when they talk about compensation. So I just be my, when you talk through it, I like how you carefully chose your words. But the benefits are considered usually part of compensation for people. So that is, and that's a choice for you all to make. And I would also finally say, you have tied your salary increases to the average state.
Amount for the constitutional officers.
Is that what is the amount for the constitutional? And that was actually a useful thing to do because
Yes, that improved things a little.
well, it also ties it to a rate where you're not in the awkward position of trying to figure, you're going in line with the rest of state government, and that was a useful thing to, so as much.
Exempts within.
Exempts, well, yeah, it was a constitutional officer, she said, so yeah. So that was a very useful step to move forward, and it's a way to try to figure out how to have an appropriate increase that isn't having to be voted on every time you.
Well, we had it before with cost CSI. It crept up every year a tiny bit.
Well,
This
so
year as a result.
in the collective bargaining agreement, there are two pieces to increases for compensation throughout the year. One is the step increases that apply to state employees, and the other is the cost of living. And previously, I believe you only got the cost of living.
We only got the cost.
So now, and that's, for example, for this current fiscal year, the combination of the two is 4.9%, and the cost of living was, I think, 2% of that, or 3% of that. So you would have gotten 3%, but you would have missed under the previous system, you would have missed the 1.9%.
Right.
So it's something.
It's an improvement.
Yes.
And it got us for the first time over $800 a week.
Senator Bielski, did you have a question?
No.
Okay, thank you.
I had a weird ear thing.
Oh, okay. Anyone, Senator Norris, did you have another question?
No,
Okay.
not right now, but I do have a lot of questions.
Okay. Well, we will, when we make some more decisions, we will want to have more of a formal write-up. And yeah, would definitely want you to look through whatever survey we might or might not do. And in terms of staffing the off-session study committee, because we have you, all three of you basically staffing that, is that an issue in terms of?
I'm going to speak to that. It depends on what the other summer studies committees are. I just would say to you, like, at the moment, no, but I think it depends on how many, as you well know, sometimes there are, as Dan also pointed out, some summers there are a lot and sometimes there are fewer. And so it really depends on what else is on our plate.
Yeah, and the committee is broader in terms of what it's looking at as well, and that was sort of intentional to, yeah. Okay,
It's a non-campaign year, so there'll be more than fewer.
yeah, there'll be, quite a few of them. Great, well, thank you both so much for coming and joining us. Mike, did you have something else you want to add? Okay, it looked like you wanted to say something, so, okay, cool, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Jen, do you have anything you wanted to add? Okay, cool. Well, we're actually ahead of schedule, so. We have some representatives joining us at 3:10, but if we're gonna take a break, if you guys can try to be back there at